Now I'm going to introduce the guest speaker, Reverend Dr. Todd Statham, and he is a Christian Reformed campus director at the University of British Columbia on the Okanagan campus in Kelowna. He is a former missionary of the Presbyterian Church in Canada to Malawi, and he lives in Kelowna with his wife and kids. And it says many cats and horses. I don't know how many horses he has in his house, but that sounds interesting. I think you can have a number of cats, but I'm not sure how many horses. So, Todd, maybe you can explain that and come and bring us your message. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah. Yep.
My tone is fine. Good. Yes, there's no horses in my house, so you're not going to see a horse walking behind me. My
Oh,
wife is an equine therapist, so she
wow.
has 8 horses.
8 horses. Wow.
Yeah. Whatever the year is, whether it's 2025 or 2026, we're agreed that we're here and it's good for me to be here and I'm delighted to join you all. Pleased to see so many people out for an AGM on a Saturday morning in March. I serve on the Christian School Board here in Kelowna. In fact, I'm just in my last month after 6 years, and we have a heck of a time trying to get quorum at our meetings, despite being a large school, at our AGMs whenever we have an AGM. Um, but there's a lot of arm twisting involved to get people to show up. So to see so many folks out on a Saturday morning is great, and delighted to be able to join with a fellowship of believers committed to a cause that I'm passionate about, as you are, which is the Spirit's renewal of these great Protestant churches, of which the Presbyterian Church in Canada shared. And as Sandy said, I have deep roots in the PCC. I was born, baptized, raised in a pastor's home, no less. I think my dad is on the call somewhere. I can only see four or five screens on my right, but I'm sure he's there. Uh, Educated in the PCC at Presbyterian College, served the PCC as an ordained minister and missionary with international ministries in Malawi. And I'm no longer a minister in the PCC, having moved my ordination into Dutch soil, the Christian Reformed Church of North America. But I'm grateful for those Presbyterian roots, which in an age of shallow spirituality and thin theology, they run deep. And I'm delighted also to remain quite closely connected to the local presbytery of Kamloops here in BC and the local Presbyterian congregation in Kelowna, Mountain View Church, both of which are big supporters of the Christian Reformed Campus Ministry, spiritually and financially. And like you, I remain concerned about the drift of these great old mainline churches like the PCC away from the gospel. And I yearn to see Christ and the gospel become central again in our Reformed churches in Canada, whether they're Christian Reformed or Presbyterian. So all that to say, I'm happy, very happy to be with you this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. And Andy asked me to take 20 minutes and share some thoughts with you, give some remarks, what I hope are encouraging remarks based on my experiences over the last 9 years as a missionary to the secular post-secondary institution, which is the University of British Columbia. And I'm a pastor, but I'm not a congregational pastor. So perhaps not everything I say will be directly relatable to your context, which I assume for most of you is the local congregation. But I think there should be overlap. And at the end, I've got some questions and look forward to hearing your own thoughts and reflections on what I've shared. Now, I mentioned I'm a missionary to the university and a campus pastor, and both of those identities are very significant for me. I was trained to be a pastor, but God's call took me deeper into academia rather than congregational ministry. Um, but I'm blessed now to be a pastor in an academic context of the university, where these two callings of pastor and academic merge really wonderfully and add to that this kind of missionary identity. And every pastor or elder or Christian layperson is a missionary to some extent because congregations embody God's mission in action. But a campus pastor is also a missionary as an extension of a local congregation.
Mhm.
And the university or college is definitely a strategic mission field in 21st century Canada. There's this great book written back in the 1950s by a Lebanese Christian named Charles Malik, who is I think he was an integral part of the United Nations actually in the 50s. He wrote a book on a Christian perspective on the university, and he's an image that I like where he says the university is like a lever by which you move society. And I think he's right. Universities are levers that move our nation for good and bad, because a lever can move things in the wrong direction too, right? And post-secondary institutions affect on shaping our culture for good and bad. They form ideas, they perpetuate them, they fill young heads with them. And despite all the criticisms we hear right now by politicians and pundits about the university and its declining value, the declining value of a university degree, points that aren't without merit, the university remains a lever. It's hugely important in our society, and therefore it's a strategic mission field, not least because most people on the university campus are the younger generation who are the future of our nation and the future of our churches. So we want Christ proclaimed on our campus, and we want the biblical story to jostle with position for with all the other stories that our pluralistic culture looks to for meaning. And we want the next generation to be shaped to love God with their hearts, souls, and their minds. So, a strategic mission field. And I thank God for this calling to be a missionary to the undergraduates and graduate students and international students and faculty and admin at UBC. So, what does this mission field look like right now? What does renewal look like among the so-called Generation Z? I'm going to share a few anecdotes and reflections, and I'll qualify what I'm going to say just by reminding you that my mission field is a single university campus. I'm not speaking for all campuses everywhere, so I'm generalizing to an extent, and maybe that's not your experience either, and I'm happy to hear you share your reflections as well. But I'm gonna look a little bit at what the campus, what the environment looks like right now, and what that might say to people in congregations like yours who are hungering for God's renewal of his kingdom, of his church and the spread of his kingdom. And I'm gonna approach this question of renewal through a biblical passage just to give us a little bit of structure. There's a great passage of renewal from the prophet Jeremiah, and Jeremiah, you might know, is nicknamed in tradition the weep, because he weeps so often. He gets down, he gets despondent, almost giving up hope on God's judging, saving renewal of his people. Maybe Jeremiah is a good patron saint for the Renewal Fellowship. I don't know, as we kind of weep and mourn over the state of the Presbyterian Church in Canada and pray for renewal. But before renewal comes decline, and Jeremiah starts there. So this is from chapter 17. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. That person will be like a bush in the wastelands. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water, that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. Amen. I find Jeremiah's tree image here so resonant with a secular Canada full of hearts that have turned from the living God. Specifically, the person whose heart has turned from the Lord is like three things. I'll advance this slide. That person will be like a bush in the wastelands. That's first. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. I think this is how Jeremiah says in longer form what Andy started the meeting with. The world is a mess, a bang-on description of our society right now, right here. It's bleak. People are worried about the future, especially young people. Almost half of Gen Z, when surveyed, said they weren't planning to have children because the world is wrecked and it's not going to get better. We're in a wasteland. Early in the term, I was speaking with a Christian student. I hadn't seen her for a while, and I asked where she'd been, and she said she just took off. She took the fall term off from her classes, and I was sympathetic. I said, "Oh, were your classes were too hard? You needed to take a break?" She said, "No, they weren't too hard. They were too awful. I needed to take a break because they were awful." She's studying cultural studies anthropology. Probably that's her mistake. It's not that she's hearing professors criticize Christianity. That's normal. She's used to that. Her skin's thick. And she was getting down because her professors were constantly criticizing humanity as a plague, as an infection on the world. Regretting humanity is normal as a scourge on the earth. This is a kind of secular gospel one is hearing increasingly on campus, that the only hope for our world is a kind of post-human future born out of either technological progress or some kind of cataclysmic environmental failure. Either way, the future is a post-human one. Humanity is dispensed with. That would get me down too if I was hearing that constantly from my lecturers. I organized a couple of lectures for Christian students last term, one on a Christian approach to artificial intelligence, and the other by a friend of mine who teaches biology on bearing the image of God in an age of crisis. And these were really appreciated by Christian undergraduates because this is the cutting edge of Christian apologetics right now in our time and place. A couple generations ago, we might be trying to argue with undergraduates that God exists. Now we have to argue with them that humankind exists. And it's a good thing that we're here. An anecdote just to make the point. We're in a kind of wasteland. And it's lonely out here. That's Jeremiah's second point. A salt land where no one lives. As we all know, loneliness troubles the extremes of our society. The old folks, many who get from younger people. Just before COVID, the CBC did a survey of Canadian campuses, and they found out that 2/3 of undergraduate students said they feel lonely most of the time. And I cringe to think what that number would be now. Now, I facilitate a faculty group for Christian faculty. We have a great time. 5 or 6 times a year, we meet, and two of us among the group, there's usually about 8 to 10, will give a talk on some of our research, and we encourage the lecturers, the professors, to integrate faith and theology and religion into whatever they're talking about, into their research and presentations, because we want to make this a kind of secure place for them to feel like they can be Christian academics. But really what we're doing is creating a group of friends in a very lonely environment. So we have great conversation, good wine, growing friendships. It's beautiful. Interestingly, in the last 18 months, two professors asked to join our faculty group who aren't Christian at all. One of them, in fact, is an atheist, and the other was Muslim. And I asked both of them, why would you want to join a faculty group that's explicitly Christian and where we often give papers on Christian theology or things related to Christian theology? And both men answered exactly the same way. They said, I'm really, really lonely. This is a campus, a salt land where no one lives. This is my context, but your context is the same. It's a lonely world we're in. And don't underestimate the attraction of even a small group of believers in this lonely world. We're lonely and parched. This is the third thing that Jeremiah says. Where do hearts turn now to see a vision of the good and the true and the beautiful, to hear words of comfort and hope? Now that Christianity has been devalued or dismissed, as we know, it's all about trust. And when we don't trust the living God, we end up with no one to trust at all and nothing in which to put our trust. But we've got to trust something. And so we see students so-called woke, right? It's a kind of pseudo-religion. But there's also a revival of sorts of all sorts of weird religious paraphernalia among Generation Z. Horoscopes have made a comeback among young people. Young people in a secular scientific age are into amulets, meditation, tarot cards, divination, weird stuff, really weird stuff, pagan stuff. If you're interested, you can follow up with this book by Tara Isabella Burton, Strange Rites. It came out a couple of years ago. This is based on her doctoral research at Oxford. A really fascinating read on what Gen Z is into spiritually. It's all over the place. It's crazy. I'll give you an example. Over the last 5 years, I've developed at UBC a chaplaincy that's embedded in the institution and offers faith support from a variety of religions to students of that demographic. And I coordinate it. And I was contacted last year by a young woman who wanted to book the spirituality space. We have a room that, after many years, we managed to get a room dedicated to spiritual and religious purposes on campus. And I have to oversee the room in my role as coordinating chaplain. And she asked to perform a religious ritual just for herself, right? So here's the loneliness I'm talking about. And to set up a temporary altar in the room and burn incense, which she would offer as a sacrifice. Well, she wanted to burn, in fact, a peanut butter and jam sandwich as a sacrifice to whatever spirit would listen to her. Like, I'm not making this up. A peanut butter and jam offering. Now, in my university role, I have to support students of all spiritual needs, even when they're crazy like that. But I actually had to decline her request because the spirituality room we have isn't vented for burning anything. So I was kind of like, whew, I got off on a technicality there. But my heart broke for her, a PBJ offering to whatever God would hear her. I mean, this is a desperation that's born of a heart weary in the wasteland, right? Searching for something. And I come across this kind of the so-called TikTok all the time. I see my screen is frozen. Are you still hearing me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah, good. I come across this sort of TikTok spirituality a lot. A little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's often silly. You know, John Calvin says famously that the human heart is a factory for idols. But where a couple generations ago we'd be more inclined to see the idols of money and career, now we're seeing more explicitly religious idols. This is concerning, but at the same time, it shows that hearts are restless. And I think they're restless for the real thing. St. Augustine said the heart's restless above all because it can find rest only in the real God. And that's our hope for renewal, right? Is in a sovereign God. And the fact that the human heart, however rebellious, is still attuned to God, even as we've turned away from him. And it's easy to despair of the state we're in, like Jeremiah did. And like I said, Jeremiah came close to quitting on God a few times, but he doesn't. And nor should we. We're people of hope and we're people of faith. And like God says in Jeremiah 32, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too hard for me? To which the answer is a resounding no. We're resurrection people. We can imagine beyond death. And faith gives us a sight for where God's active, and God is active right now. I'll just give you a couple of examples of where I'm seeing God moving in renewal among Gen Z on campus, and specifically among students. Faculty are a different issue. They're going to be a hard one to crack spiritually. You know, one of Leonard Cohen's last songs before he died, something like the blues. He sings, "There's no God in heaven, there is no hell below. So says the great professor of all there is to know." He's kind of poking his finger at the smugness of professors. But among students, something's happening in our lonely, parched culture right now. God is on the move. I was chatting just before Christmas with a graduate student, and she just started attending church. And of course, I want to know why, right? Why is she attending church? She says, well, in every single one of my classes, professors are constantly slamming Christianity. She's in social work, which is a very a field very, very hostile to Christianity. So she says that I'm hearing repeatedly that the church is responsible for everything wrong in society. But she says, I figured I should experience firsthand just how awful Christianity is. So she bought a Bible and she started reading it. And then she went to church one Sunday, and she hasn't stopped doing either of those since then. It's amazing. This is how God is at work. And in the Christian Reformed Church, we have a contemporary testimony of faith called "Our World Belongs to God." It's kind of like living faith in the Presbyterian Church, but it's actually much better. There's a line in it where it says, "God holds this world with fierce love." And I go back to that line a lot, that God holds this world with fierce love. And I marvel at how fierce his resolve is in a university context that's just saturated with prejudice and hostility. Signs of life out there, though. My Bible study that I had last winter term, we had about 20 students coming, and a quarter of them weren't Christians or were just on the cusp of faith. They weren't committed entirely, but they were deeply interested. A number of them got baptized in the summer. What else is there for students, for hearts to turn to and trust, to find life and hope? What else is out there? It's a wasteland. People are parched. Sometimes people of late are talking about a quiet revival among Gen Z. You may have heard of this, that there's an uptick in church attendance and interest. And anecdotally, that definitely strikes a chord with me. I don't see big numbers. I see definitely an increase in participation, but it's more the earnestness of the students that blows me away. Students are interested in truth and in beauty. They're interested in things that last because they've been raised in an era of deep fakes, in ephemeral social media. This term, I'm doing a small group with my student leader who's in the fine arts program, and she really wanted to do a small group centered around a novel, which I've never done before. And we chose one of the most demanding, greatest Christian novels there is, which is Fyodor Dostoevsky's 19th century novel, Crime and Punishment. Maybe some of you have read it. It is, there's a heart going up the screen. So there's a Dostoevsky fan there. It's an extremely demanding novel that is centered around a murder. It's dark, it's gloomy, and there's this thread of resurrection running through it. I thought we'd get maybe two or three students coming out to read a 700-page novel, but we have 15 students who come every week to work through this massive novel. And two of those students aren't Christians, but they're absolutely captivated with the Christian moral vision. You could, I guess, to put it technically, they would say they can't quite commit to our metaphysics, but they love our moral vision, the moral vision of the Christian faith. And this to me is a good example of just the earnestness of this generation as they seek. G.K. Chesterton wrote in Orthodoxy over 100 years ago how we're always rushing around to create our own systems. And then we turn around and we find Christianity. He says, sitting up there in the sunlight, shining, thousands of years old. And I do think that this return to ancient truths might just be offering this that our modern institutions and ideologies have failed to provide for young people. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. The leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought, never fails to bear fruit. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I were gifted with a trip to the Middle East, to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. And when we were in Jordan, in a place called Wadi Rum, we saw this magnificent tree, the one that's on your screen, out in the desert, in the middle of the wadi. This tree with green leaves and deep, deep roots that can withstand the desert heat and drought. And this tree is Jeremiah's tree. right? This is the heart that has responded to trusting in Christ our Savior, a heart that's nourished by prayer, scripture, sacraments, worship, acts of loving service to our neighbor, all those things that bind us close to God. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord. No matter where we were as we hiked around in that desert, our eyes kept getting drawn back to this tree, like laser focus back on this tree, no matter where we were. Amidst all the dead, we kept seeing this sign of green life. And I think in a cultural wasteland, the one that we're living in right now, we shouldn't wonder if people, particularly young people, have their eyes drawn to this living tree, this green tree. This is the beauty of hearts that are trusting in God, a sign of life in a wasteland that we're in. So, what might all this mean for your congregations and where you're at? I want to just throw out in closing in the last couple minutes here, just a couple of thoughts, maybe to get the conversation going. Some practical way markers for PCC congregations as you engage or not with Gen Z. What might this tree, if your congregation is this green tree, what might Gen Z notice about it, their eyes to you? And I'm just going to throw out three things, okay? And I could say many more, but we'll keep it at the three. I think the first thing to notice if this tree is green and alive is that your congregation is a place where the gospel is central, that the Bible is being preached in its fullness, and where rigorous discipleship habits are front and center. We want congregations to have we want them to be spiritually accessible, but we don't want them to take it easy on Gen Z. Like I detect no appetite among young seekers for diluted forms of Christianity, watered down gospels. I think that's good news for people in the Renewal Fellowship. Young people want the Christian faith in totality. They want the whole Bible as the great story of the whole world. This is a mistake, I think, where we're in the Presbyterian Church, when Presbyterian churches have engaged in campus ministry or chaplaincy, um, we've often done it historically through ecumenical chaplaincy. So we're partnered with the United Church and the Anglican Church. And in my experience, a lot of these ecumenical are not always, but they're often beholden to university ideologies. They're not presenting the robust gospel, the one that calls people to repentance and offers them new life. I don't think there's much I don't think there's much appetite among young people for that right now. If there ever was, they can get those ideologies on campus. We want to offer them something different. So be robust in your theology and your biblical, be unashamed of the gospel. People want to hear it. Secondly, I would say that these green trees in the desert that eyes are being drawn to have have worship and liturgy that is relevant and meaningful, but not trendy. Um, I guess there's a kind of balance here. Like I could put it like this: some of my best and brightest students are attracted to, as they come to faith and grow, they're often attracted to becoming Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, or even Anglican, in part because those churches offer liturgies that are horizontal. They have to do not just with me and the people around me, but they have to do with me and God. Like these are liturgies that draw us up to God, and they're often beautiful too. I was just talking to a student a couple of months ago who's interested in Christianity. He's not a Christian yet, and he said, I think as I'm interested in faith, I want to grow. What should I do? And I said, well, you should get connected to a local church. That's the best place to explore faith. He said, okay, so what's the most beautiful church in Kelowna? And I was taken aback by that. And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure that's probably the first question you should ask." Like I would say, as a Reformed Christian, where's the best preaching? But I found that fascinating in his secular mind. He wants to explore God, and he immediately connects it to beauty. Isn't that remarkable? Um, we have a cold, ugly secular world, and for him, Christian faith and God instinctively are related to beauty. We want to be intentional about liturgy and worship. I don't even think it's about having contemporary worship versus traditional. It's just about being excellent. Excellent worship and liturgy that's intentional, that's God focused, and that's not trendy. I'll give you one more example. During orientation back in September, orientation is the big event on campus when all the new students come and they get exposed to all the clubs and activities. And a number of community organizations can come up at during this orientation day. So a number of churches came up and had a booth, which is great, good for them. One of the big churches near the campus, which is very trendy, very like, sort of hyper contemporary, has the worship service that's kind of concert like with smoke machines and lights and a rock band. They were handing out flyers inviting people to their church service, which again, good for them. But the flyer said something like, we're a church, but we're really like a disco. And it had a kind of cool 70s theme. Um, and a kid was walking by my table, the chaplaincy table, and he had this flyer in his hand, and he was talking to his friend, clearly not a churchgoer, and he says, "Why the hell would I go to a church that looks like a disco? If I was going to go to a church, I'd go to a church." And I love, as a Presbyterian Reform guy, I just love that because you don't do disco in the Renewal Fellowship. Presbyterians can't do disco, nor should we, but we can do church, and if that church is traditional, there's lots of promise for that for young people. And I think the last thing I'll say, and I'll close with this, is these green trees in the desert are going to be hospitable communities. They're going to be communities where young people are welcomed in as they are, for all with all their questions and doubts and all the messiness of their faith. There's a remarkable hunger among Gen Z for mentorship and discipleship. Like this is a very, very teachable generation. Not like my generation, where to our elders, we wouldn't seek their advice or wisdom. Gen Z are fine and indeed covet relationships with older people who are people of faith and can share from their wisdom and experience. This is a lonely generation. They're adrift. They're addicted to their phones. They get all this information that's sort of running through them at hyper speed. Conversations with people who've been around and can share godly wisdom from their experience is a gift. And I think that's a gift that the PCC can share with younger people because you are an aging you are an aging demographic. Um, but that gray hair can be the gift of silver wisdom to our people nowadays. I see this, especially this desire for mentorship, especially among young men, who are really almost a lost generation, but also among young women too. So think of your aging congregation in a sense as a kind of spiritual resource, practicing hospitality by deeply investing in their lives. I could go on and on, but I'm going to just keep it to those three things. I always have lots of ideas and of how congregations can connect with young people, and lots of stories. But I think what I'll do is just leave it. I'm going to be around during the break and at the adjournment if you want to talk to me one-on-one, or throw some questions. But I do have some questions prepared. I'll pull them up on the screen. And I think, Andy, you're going to send us into breakout sessions for this, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. Yeah. And so, Todd, if you want to just outline the questions real quick, and then we'll get the breakout rooms in action.
Yeah, sure. Um, First of all, anything in my reflections, my comments, stories strike you as new or challenging? Do you see any overlap between what I've described and your own community, your own congregation? And then secondly, where has Gen Z found welcome in your congregation or not? And that's a good introspective question. It's not trying to assign blame. It's just thinking about whether that's happened or not. And then last, of the three targets that I suggested, biblical preaching, relevant, excellent worship and liturgy, intentional discipleship. Where and how could your congregation improve? Maybe one of those three things is something you as a congregation can really lean into. So just a little bit of brainstorming, a little bit of sharing of experiences.
Okay. Awesome. Todd, you've given us a heck of a lot to think about. This is wonderful. So Josh, if you're ready, can you put us in our discussion group? It's going to be 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and do some discussion and sharing as a group before we take our break.